The world doesn't change with an announcement. It changes when the most powerful people on earth quietly walk into the same room. High in the Swiss Alps, away from the noise of markets and the glare of politics, decisions are about to be shaped that won't make headlines today, but will move trillions tomorrow. This is not a conference. This is a convergence. Capital, technology, and power arrive at the same moment, carrying the weight of a global economy under pressure. While most of the world watches from the outside, a select few are inside the room, recalibrating risk, redefining opportunity, and setting the tone for what comes next. When these doors close, markets listen, governments adjust, and the future quietly begins to take shape. This is Davos, and what happens here never stays here. As the world's most influential figures descend upon Davos, what we are witnessing is not a social ritual of the elite, but a strategic convergence of power, capital, and decision-making. This gathering matters because it reflects where gravity in the global economy truly lies. When leaders who allocate trillions of dollars, shape markets, and influence policy choose to be in one place at the same time, it is a signal, not of symbolism, but of intent. Davos remains one of the few arenas where private capital and public policy intersect in real time, where conversations behind closed doors can later translate into shifts in markets, regulations, and global priorities. The presence of the world's most powerful financial and technological minds underscores a simple truth. Economic leadership today is no longer confined to governments alone. Capital moves faster than legislation, innovation outpaces regulation, and those who understand this dynamic hold disproportionate influence over the future. Davos attracts these individuals because it offers something rare: access. Access to policymakers who write the rules, to innovators who disrupt entire industries, and to peers who understand the scale and responsibility of managing institutions that shape the global system. This is not about visibility, it is about leverage. In an era defined by geopolitical fragmentation, persistent inflationary pressures, and rapid technological acceleration, these conversations carry heightened urgency. Decisions made in boardrooms now ripple through labor markets, supply chains, and national economies. Davos becomes a pressure chamber for ideas, stress testing assumptions about growth, risk, and resilience. Leaders arrive not merely to speak, but to listen, to calibrate strategies against the collective intelligence of those facing the same macroeconomic headwinds. That exchange of perspective is invaluable, especially when uncertainty has become the dominant feature of the global outlook. What also distinguishes this moment is the diversity of influence represented. Finance brings discipline, risk assessment, and capital allocation. Technology brings speed, scale, and transformation. Together, they redefine how value is created and preserved. When these forces align, they can drive productivity, innovation, and prosperity. When they diverge, instability follows. Davos serves as a rare forum where alignment can be negotiated, not through headlines, but through deliberate, informed dialogue among those who understand the consequences of miscalculation. There is, however, an unspoken expectation that accompanies this level of influence. Stewardship. The concentration of wealth and power demands more than performance. It demands judgment. Markets reward efficiency, but societies demand stability and fairness. The leaders arriving in Davos carry the weight of that balance. Their capital decisions affect not just shareholders, but workers, communities, and governments. Their voices shape narratives that influence confidence, the most fragile yet essential currency in any economic system. Ultimately, the significance of Davos lies not in who arrives, but in what follows. The real impact is measured months later, in investment flows, policy shifts, technological deployment, and economic resilience. This is why the world pays attention, because when the most powerful players gather with purpose, the outcomes extend far beyond the mountains. They reach into the everyday lives of millions, shaping the trajectory of the global economy long after the snow is melted. The sheer scale of wealth represented by those arriving in Davos is not a statistic meant to impress. It is a reality that demands sober reflection. When individuals who collectively control hundreds of billions of dollars gather in one place, the conversation inevitably shifts from personal success to systemic impact. This concentration of capital is a defining feature of modern capitalism, and Davos is where its implications are most clearly visible. Wealth at this level is not idle, it is deployed, repositioned, hedged, and leveraged across markets and borders, shaping outcomes far beyond any single balance sheet. What matters is not the number itself, but what that capital can influence. It determines which technologies scale and which fade. It decides whether industries modernize or stagnate. It influences whether economies adapt to disruption or fracture under pressure. In today's interconnected world, capital allocation has become one of the most powerful policy tools in existence. Unlike governments, capital is not constrained by election cycles. It moves with speed, conviction, and global reach. That is why the arrival of the world's wealthiest decision makers commands attention. It reflects where decisive economic momentum resides. Yet wealth at this scale also introduces complexity and risk. Markets are increasingly shaped by a small group of actors whose decisions can amplify volatility or stabilize systems. A single strategic shift can move currencies, reprice risk, or redirect investment flows across the continents. Davos becomes a forum where these realities are openly acknowledged, where peers test assumptions against one another, and where long-term positioning is discussed in the context of global stability. This is not coordination in the conspiratorial sense. It is calibration among those who understand the magnitude of their influence. There is also a broader societal dimension that cannot be ignored. As wealth concentrates, scrutiny intensifies. Public trust in institutions depends on whether economic success translates into shared prosperity. Those controlling vast resources are increasingly expected to think beyond quarterly returns and consider long-term resilience of markets, of workforces, of communities. At Davos, this tension is palpable. The discussions are no longer solely about growth, but about sustainability, inclusion, and legitimacy. A capital that fails to account for social consequences ultimately undermines the system that enables it. At the same time, it would be a mistake to view concentrated wealth as inherently detached from progress. Large pools of capital have the capacity to fund innovation at a scale that governments often cannot. They can accelerate breakthroughs in energy, infrastructure, healthcare, and technology, areas critical to global growth. The question is not whether wealth should exist at this level, but how deliberately and responsibly it is deployed. Davos provides a setting where that question is confronted directly, not as a morale exercise, but as a strategic necessity. In the end, the presence of immense wealth in Davos is a mirror of the global economy itself, uneven, powerful, and deeply interconnected. The choices made by those who hold it will define the trajectory of markets and societies alike. This is why the world watches, because when capital of this magnitude moves with clarity and purpose, it has the power to reinforce stability, unlock opportunity, and shape the future far beyond the confines of a mountain resort. The agenda taking shape at Davos reflects the reality that the global economy is no longer driven by a single dominant force, but by a complex intersection of finance, technology, geopolitics, and societal expectations. This is not a moment for narrow thinking. The discussions unfolding are broad because the risks are broad. Growth, inflation, energy security, technological disruption, and geopolitical fragmentation are no longer isolated challenges. They are deeply entangled. Decisions in one domain now reverberate instantly across others, forcing leaders to think systemically rather than tactically. What makes this gathering consequential is the quality of the dialogue. The focus is not on short-term market noise, but on structural forces that will define the next decade. How do economies grow when labor markets are tight and demographics are shifting? How do markets price risk when geopolitical uncertainty has become persistent rather than cyclical? How do institutions remain credible when trust in leadership is under strain? These are not theoretical questions. They are active constraints on capital allocation, investment horizons, and corporate strategy. Technology sits at the center of this conversation, not as a novelty, but as a catalyst reshaping every sector. Advances in artificial intelligence, data infrastructure, and automation are accelerating productivity in some areas while displacing it in others. This creates both opportunity and tension. Leaders at Davos understand that innovation without foresight can destabilize societies, while hesitation can leave economies uncompetitive. The challenge is not whether to adopt new technologies, but how to integrate them responsibly into existing systems without fracturing social cohesion or amplifying inequality. At the same time, macroeconomic discipline has returned to the forefront. Years of abundant liquidity and low interest rates have given way to a more demanding environment. Capital is no longer free, and mistakes are more costly. This shift forces a reassessment of risk, leverage, and long-term returns. Conversations at Davos reflect this recalibration. There is a renewed emphasis on resilience, on balance sheets that can withstand shocks, supply chains that can adapt, and policies that can absorb volatility without triggering crisis. Geopolitics adds another layer of complexity. Economic decision-making is increasingly shaped by national security considerations, trade realign, and strategic competition. Markets must now price not just economic fundamentals, but political intent. This reality has changed how leaders think about globalization, diversification, and exposure. Davos becomes a rare environment where these issues can be addressed candidly, across borders, and with an appreciation for the unintended consequences of unilateral action. Underlying all of this is a recognition that leadership today requires more than technical competence. It requires judgment, the ability to weigh growth against stability, innovation against disruption, efficiency against resilience. The agenda at Davos reflects that balance. It is not about grand declarations, but about practical alignment, finding ways for public and private actors to move in the same direction even when interests diverge. Ultimately, the value of this agenda lies in its realism. It acknowledges that the global economy is entering a more complex, contested, and uncertain phase, but it also affirms that thoughtful leadership, informed by data, experience, and dialogue, can still shape positive outcomes. That is why these conversations matter, not because they offer easy answers, but because they confront hard truths with the seriousness they demand. The prominence of technology at this gathering is not a trend. It is an acknowledgement of a permanent shift in how economic power is created and sustained. Innovation has moved from the periphery of business strategy to its core, and those who lead in technology now shape outcomes across industries, markets, and even national policies. Davos reflects this reality. The conversations are no longer about whether technology will change the global economy, but about how quickly and how unevenly that change will unfold. At the center of this transformation is the acceleration of advanced computing, artificial intelligence, and data-driven decision-making. These tools are redefining productivity, compressing timelines, and altering competitive advantage at a scale rarely seen before. Firms that harness them effectively can leapfrog incumbents, those that fail to adapt risk irrelevance. This dynamic creates a widening gap between leaders and laggards, not just at the corporate level, but across entire economies. Davos becomes a forum where this divide is openly examined and where strategies to manage it are debated with urgency. Yet technological dominance brings with it a new class of risk. Speed without governance can destabilize markets. Automation without transition planning can fracture labor systems. Data without trust can erode institutional credibility. The leaders engaged in these discussions understand that innovation is not inherently stabilizing, it must be guided. This is why the dialogue extends beyond product breakthroughs and into ethics, regulation, and accountability. The goal is not to slow progress, but to ensure that its benefits are durable and broadly distributed. Technology also reshapes how capital is allocated. Traditional metrics are being supplemented and in some cases replaced by models that emphasize scalability, network effects, and intangible assets. This requires a different mindset, one that values optionality, adaptability, and long-term investment over short-term optimization. At Davos, this shift is evident. The conversations reflect a growing recognition that the most valuable assets of the future may not appear on balance sheets in conventional ways, yet they will determine competitive survival. There's also a geopolitical dimension to technological leadership. Control over critical infrastructure, advanced chips, and strategic data has become a matter of national interest. Innovation is no longer purely commercial, it is strategic. This reality complicates global cooperation, introduces friction into supply chains, and forces difficult trade-offs between efficiency and security. Davos provides a rare neutral ground where these tensions can be addressed directly with an understanding that fragmentation carries costs for everyone. Ultimately, the focus on technology at Davos underscores a broader truth. Economic leadership in the modern era is inseparable from technological competence. The ability to invest wisely, regulate intelligently, and deploy innovation responsibly will define which institutions and which societies thrive. This is not about celebrating disruption for its own sake. It is about recognizing that the future is being built now, and that the decisions made by today's leaders will determine whether technology becomes a source of resilience or a catalyst for instability. At its core, this gathering represents a test of leadership in an era where influence travels faster than accountability. When public institutions face gridlock and global coordination is increasingly difficult, the role of private leadership expands by necessity. Davos has become a place where that responsibility is confronted directly. It is one of the few environments where those who command capital, innovation, and organizational scale are expected to engage not only with opportunity, but with consequence. The platform matters because decisions made in the private sector now shape outcomes traditionally associated with public policy. Investment flows influence energy transitions. Corporate strategies affect employment, supply chains, and regional stability. Technological deployment alters productivity and social structure. These are not abstract effects, they are measurable realities. Davos forces an acknowledgement of this power, and with it, an expectation of thoughtful stewardship rather than reactive decision-making. There is a growing understanding that legitimacy in leadership is no longer derived solely from performance metrics. Markets may reward efficiency, but societies demand resilience and fairness. Confidence in the global economic system depends on whether people believe that growth benefits more than a narrow segment of the population. Leaders at this level are acutely aware that erosion of trust is not a social issue alone. It is a financial risk. Instability, polarization, and loss of confidence ultimately undermine markets themselves. This is why the dialogue increasingly emphasizes partnership between public and private actors. Governments bring authority and a democratic mandate. Markets bring speed, capital, and innovation. Neither can succeed in isolation. Davos serves as a bridge between these worlds, not to blur their roles, but to align them where interests intersect. When alignment fails, fragmentation follows. When it succeeds, it creates the conditions for sustainable growth and long-term investment. Accountability is a recurring undercurrent in these conversations. Influence without transparency invites backlash. Capital without context breeds misallocation. The most effective leaders understand that long-term success requires not just anticipating market cycles, but understanding social expectations. That awareness shapes how risks are taken, how narratives are framed, and how decisions are communicated. In a hyper-connected world, perception can move markets as quickly as fundamentals. Ultimately, the significance of Davos lies in what happens after the meeting's end. The true measure of leadership is not presence, but follow-through. It is seen in how capital is deployed, how innovation is governed, and how institutions respond when conditions deteriorate. The world does not need declarations, it needs disciplined action informed by responsibility. This moment demands clarity. Clarity about the limits of power, the weight of influence, and the consequences of inaction. Those who gather with that understanding have an opportunity to reinforce stability, restore confidence, and shape an economic system capable of withstanding the pressures ahead. That is the real test of leadership, and it cannot be postponed. So when the lights dim and the convoys leave the mountains, don't be fooled into thinking the moment has passed. That's when it actually begins. The real impact won't be measured in speeches or photo ops, but in the moves that follow: capital reallocated, strategies rewritten, risks taken with conviction. The world won't hear what was said behind those doors, but it will feel the consequences in markets, in industries, and in everyday life. Because when the people who shape the system reach alignment, momentum becomes unstoppable. Davos doesn't end when the summit closes, it echoes until the next global shift proves it was never just a meeting, but a turning point.